Dorian Kane, a diplomat from Earth, had been traveling between distant stars for most of his adult life, yet nothing could have prepared him for the magnificence of the kingdom of Princess Aracel. As part of an intergalactic delegation sent to form alliances with other species, Dorian was tasked with representing humanity in a world far beyond anything he had ever encountered. The moment he arrived on Aracel's home planet, he was struck by the beauty of the palace, nestled among vast crystal mountains, where the night sky glittered with an endless sea of stars. Everything was different here, more advanced, more serene. And yet, one thing stood out above all else: the legendary Princess Aracel. Princess Aracel was not only the heir to the throne, but also a renowned figure across the galaxy for her unmatched intelligence, beauty, and strength. With her silver-blue skin, flowing dark hair, and violet eyes that gleamed like the stars, she was a vision of otherworldly grace. But it wasn't just her appearance that had captured the galaxy's attention. Aracel had refused all suitors, dismissing every potential match as unworthy of her. Her reputation as a ruler was built on wisdom and control, but no one truly understood why she had shut her heart off from love. No one, that is, except for her closest confidants. Dorian first laid eyes on her during the grand royal event held in her honor, a gathering of diplomats and noble guests from across the galaxy. As the room buzzed with conversation, Dorian stood near the edge of the ballroom, observing the guests, but his attention kept drifting back to the princess. She stood at the center of it all, surrounded by eager suitors vying for her attention, but there was a certain coolness in her eyes, an aloofness that spoke volumes. She politely smiled at each guest, but Dorian could tell she wasn't interested. Her posture, the subtle way she dismissed their compliments, made it clear that no one was close to earning her favor. Curiosity stirred within Dorian. As the only human at the event, he felt out of place, yet his fascination with Aracel grew stronger. Why had she rejected everyone? What had shaped her to be so guarded? Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the princess than the royal facade. She had been raised to rule, to uphold her people's traditions and values, but surely there was something more, a depth, a vulnerability, a heart that no one had reached yet. As the evening went on, Dorian found himself standing near the princess, who was now conversing with a few of the most powerful suitors in the room. He tried to keep his distance, but couldn't help but feel the pull of her presence. Every time their eyes met across the room, there was an unspoken challenge. She had noticed him too, but unlike the others, she did not seem to judge him based on his appearance. It was as if she could sense that he wasn't like the rest, that he was more than just another diplomat playing the part. It was that moment, in the quiet chaos of the palace ballroom, that Dorian decided he would be the one to win her over. But first, he would need to understand what made Princess Aracel tick, what kept her heart locked away. And he had a feeling that his journey into the heart of this powerful woman would be anything but simple. The following day, Dorian found himself once again in the grand halls of Aracel's palace, preparing for a formal audience with the princess. The corridors echoed with the soft footsteps of servants and guards, their presence a reminder of the royal court's unyielding structure. But Dorian's mind wasn't on the politics or the formalities of the meeting. It was on the enigmatic princess. He had only exchanged a few words with her at the royal event the night before, but something about their brief interaction had lingered in his thoughts. There was a quiet strength about Princess Aracel, something that drew him in and made him want to understand her better. He arrived early, as requested, and was ushered into a waiting room where the princess would join him shortly. The room was lavish, with high ceilings and walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting the kingdom's long and proud history. Yet despite the beauty of the surroundings, Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The people of Aracel's world were advanced beyond anything Earth had ever seen, but the princess's cold reputation made him wonder if the kingdom's prosperity came at a cost, if love, companionship, and genuine connection had been sacrificed in favor of power and status. As Dorian sat, lost in his thoughts, the doors opened, and Princess Aracel entered the room. Her presence was like a force of nature, commanding attention without a single word. She wore a gown of silver fabric that shimmered like moonlight, the intricate designs accentuating her regal stature. Her violet eyes met Dorian's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken questions and curiosity. "Dorian Kane," she said finally, her voice smooth yet carrying an air of authority. "I trust you understand the importance of this meeting. Your people have been chosen to represent Earth in our intergalactic alliance. I have high expectations." Dorian stood, bowing slightly in respect. "I do, Your Highness," he replied, his voice steady. "And I'm ready to work with you to ensure that our two worlds can find common ground." Aracel studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I'm sure you are," she said, her tone suggesting that she had seen many diplomats with grand promises before. "But tell me, Dorian Kane, what makes you different from the others who have come before you?" Dorian's heart raced, but he didn't falter. He had dealt with powerful leaders before, but there was something about Aracel that made him pause. "I can't speak for others, Your Highness," he said, his voice earnest. "But I can tell you that my interest in this alliance isn't just about politics. It's about the future of both our people. And I believe that starts with understanding each other, not just our cultures, but who we truly are." Aracel raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You speak as though you understand me," she said, her voice carrying a hint of challenge. "Tell me, Dorian, why do you think that is?" Dorian met her gaze, a small smile forming on his lips. "Because, Your Highness," he said softly, "I believe that beneath your crown, beneath the weight of your responsibilities, there's more to you than meets the eye. And I think that's what makes you different from everyone else who has tried to win your favor." For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in Aracel's eyes, something that almost looked like surprise, followed by a quiet amusement. She regarded him for a moment longer, as if trying to decide whether he was just another diplomat with empty words or someone who might actually be different. Finally, she nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "We'll see, Dorian Kane. We'll see." And with that, the meeting began. But Dorian couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. It seemed that for the first time, he had caught her attention, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who might just break through the walls the princess had built around herself. Over the next few days, Dorian continued his work with Princess Aracel, but their interactions grew increasingly personal. At first, their meetings were focused on the formalities of the intergalactic alliance, with Dorian presenting Earth's position on various matters, and Aracel carefully listening, her sharp mind taking in every detail. But as they spent more time together, there was a subtle shift. The discussions grew less about politics and more about their worlds, their cultures, and their lives. Aracel's initial coldness began to thaw, and she allowed herself moments of vulnerability, sharing glimpses of the pressures she faced as the future queen of her people. One afternoon, after another lengthy discussion about trade agreements and military strategies, Dorian and Aracel found themselves walking through the royal gardens, a quiet escape from the palace's busy halls. The lush landscape around them was breathtaking, with vibrant flowers of every color imaginable and towering trees that seemed to hum with an energy all their own. The air was cool, filled with the scent of blossoms and the distant hum of the palace's life beyond the garden walls. "I've often wondered," Dorian began, breaking the comfortable silence, "how you manage all of this. Your people expect so much from you, your family, the kingdom, your role as a future queen. It seems like it would be a heavy burden." Aracel glanced over at him, her violet eyes thoughtful. "It is," she admitted softly. "The weight of it all is suffocating at times. But I have always been prepared for this. It's what I was born for. My people have looked to me for strength, and I cannot let them down. If I show any weakness, they will think me unfit to rule." Dorian could sense the unspoken depth behind her words. He had known that being the leader was not easy, but hearing her speak of the pressure she faced Pressure that she had borne alone for so long made him admire her even more. But who do you turn to when you need someone? Who helps carry the weight when it gets too much? Aracel's lips tightened, and for a moment, she seemed to retreat into herself. I've never had that luxury, she replied quietly. I've been taught that my duty comes first. There's no room for personal desires, no room for anyone to share the burden. Dorian stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Aracel, I don't believe that. I've seen the strength in you, yes, but I've also seen how much you give of yourself. You deserve someone who can help, someone who can stand by your side, someone who can carry some of that weight. Aracel met his gaze, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine if he truly meant those words. There was a flicker of something in her expression, a hint of hope, but quickly masked by the walls she had spent years building. I've always been alone in this, Dorian. I'm not sure I can trust anyone enough to let them in. Dorian's heart ached for her. He could see the loneliness in her eyes, the silent yearning for connection that she had buried deep inside. What if I told you, he said softly, that you don't have to be alone? Not anymore. For a moment, there was no response. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath as Aracel stood there, processing his words. Dorian knew that he had just offered her something that no one else had, the possibility of a different future, one where she didn't have to bear the burden alone. And despite the risks, he knew in his heart that he wanted to be the one to stand by her side. Finally, Aracel spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said, her words tinged with both fear and hope. Dorian smiled softly, his voice filled with reassurance. I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm asking you to let me prove that you don't have to carry everything alone. And in that quiet moment, as the sun began to set over the royal gardens, something shifted between them. The walls Aracel had so carefully constructed began to crumble, piece by piece, and Dorian could feel it, her heart just beginning to open. The days that followed were filled with a new, unspoken understanding between Dorian and Aracel. They continued their meetings, discussing the future of their worlds and working together to strengthen the alliance, but the dynamic between them had shifted. Aracel, once so distant, now allowed herself small moments of vulnerability with Dorian. She began to see him not just as a diplomat from Earth, but as someone who genuinely cared for her, someone who didn't see her solely as a princess or a ruler, but as a person with hopes, dreams, and fears. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting series of discussions with her council, Aracel invited Dorian to a quiet corner of the palace, away from the eyes of the court. They sat together in a secluded garden, where the sounds of the bustling kingdom seemed to fade into the background. The garden was serene, the air filled with the scent of exotic flowers, and the sunlight filtered through the thick branches of ancient trees. It was a place where Aracel felt safe, away from the expectations of her royal duties. I don't often take time for myself, Aracel admitted, looking around the peaceful garden. There's always something else to be done, always something else I should be thinking about. Dorian nodded, understanding the pressure she faced. I can imagine. You carry the weight of an entire kingdom on your shoulders. Aracel looked at him, her violet eyes softening. It's not just the kingdom. It's the legacy, the future. My people expect so much from me. They think that I should have it all figured out already. But sometimes, I wish I could be like everyone else, with no responsibilities, no expectations. Dorian could sense the burden in her words, the quiet longing for a life beyond the palace walls. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but filled with sincerity. You don't have to be perfect, Aracel. You don't have to carry everything alone. I know what it's like to feel that weight, to feel like you're the only one who can do something, but that's not true. You don't have to be the only one. For a moment, Aracel said nothing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The silence between them was thick with unspoken emotions, and Dorian could feel the walls around her slowly beginning to crack. She was so strong, so self-reliant, but he could see the loneliness in her eyes. He wanted to be the one to help her, to prove that she didn't have to be alone in this. "I've always been afraid," Aracel said quietly, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "Afraid that if I let someone in, if I let myself care for them, I'll lose everything. That my duty will always come first." Dorian reached across the space between them, gently taking her hand in his. "Aracel, you don't have to choose between love and duty. You can have both. I want to be by your side, not as a diplomat, not as a suitor, but as someone who cares about you, about who you are, not what you represent." Aracel's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this before, not in her whole life. The walls she had built around her heart, the walls she thought were unbreakable, began to crumble. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was room for love in her life after all. "I don't know if I'm ready," Aracel whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I want to try." Dorian smiled softly, his heart swelling with hope. "That's all I ask." And in that quiet, peaceful garden, something shifted between them, something deep and powerful. For the first time, Aracel allowed herself to imagine a future where love and duty could exist together, side by side. The days after that conversation felt different for both Dorian and Aracel. What had started as an alliance built on diplomacy and necessity had slowly transformed into something more personal, something neither of them had anticipated. Aracel began to open up more, allowing Dorian into spaces she had kept hidden from everyone. Her dreams, her fears, and even her doubts about her ability to lead her people. Dorian, in turn, grew closer to her, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who truly cared for her well-being. It wasn't long before their bond grew stronger, and the moments they shared together, away from the formality of the royal court, became the highlight of their days. One evening, after a particularly tense session with the royal council, Dorian and Aracel found themselves once again in the palace garden, the setting sun casting a golden hue over the landscape. Aracel had been frustrated with the council's resistance to some of the proposals for the intergalactic alliance, and she was clearly drained by the constant pressure to appease both her people and the delegates from other planets. Dorian could see the exhaustion in her eyes, and though he wasn't a part of the council's proceedings, he could feel the weight of her frustration. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning," Aracel confessed as they walked along the winding path. "I'm pulled in so many directions, and no matter what I do, it never feels like enough. My people expect perfection, and yet I'm only human. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the right one for this role." Dorian stopped walking, gently taking her hand. "You're more than enough, Aracel. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, but even the strongest need someone to lean on. You don't have to carry everything alone." Aracel's gaze softened as she looked at him. "I don't know how to let anyone in, Dorian. I've spent so long building walls around myself, trying to protect my heart. I thought I couldn't afford to care about anyone." "I think you're realizing now that it's okay to care," Dorian replied, his voice warm. "It's okay to let someone in. I'm not asking you to let go of your duties, but I'm here for you. Not just as a diplomat, but as someone who wants to see you happy, Aracel." The princess stood still for a moment, processing his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of the loneliness she had carried for so long. She had pushed everyone away, convinced that her responsibility to her kingdom came first, but Dorian's words opened a door in her heart that she hadn't known was there. "I never thought it was possible to have both," she said softly, her voice filled with vulnerability. "To be both a ruler and a person with feelings, with needs. I've spent so long focusing on my people that I forgot about myself." Dorian smiled gently, stepping closer to her. "You don't have to choose, Aracel. You can be both. You can be a great ruler and still have love in your life. I'm willing to stand by you, through everything." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The palace, the kingdom, and all the expectations that had weighed on Aracel for so long faded into the background. In that quiet moment, it was just the two of them, standing in the fading light of the setting sun, and Aracel finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps, with Dorian by her side, she could find the balance she had always sought. "Maybe I'm ready to try," she whispered, her voice filled with hope. And for the first time in a long while, Aracel felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. As the days turned into weeks, Dorian and Aracel's connection continued to deepen. They found themselves spending more time together, talking late into the night, sharing their hopes and fears. The royal court had noticed the change in Aracel. She seemed lighter, more at ease, a stark contrast to the serious and distant princess they were used to. The rumors of her growing closeness with the Earth diplomat quickly spread throughout the kingdom, but neither Dorian nor Aracel paid much attention to the whispers. They had something more important than gossip, a bond that was slowly becoming undeniable. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens under a star-filled sky, Aracel turned to Dorian, her expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said to me that day in the garden, about not having to carry everything alone." She paused, her violet eyes reflecting the light of the moons above. "I've spent so much of my life believing that I couldn't let anyone in, but you've made me realize that maybe it's okay to let someone help, to share the burden." Dorian looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. "Aracel, you've always been strong. Stronger than most people could ever imagine. But even the strongest need support. You don't have to do everything on your own. You've got me, if you'll let me stay." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of Aracel's lips. She had grown to trust Dorian in a way she hadn't trusted anyone in years. His kindness, patience, and willingness to understand her had begun to break down the walls she had built around herself. But there was still a part of her that hesitated. Could she truly allow herself to depend on him? Could she risk her heart when so much of her life was defined by duty? "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," Aracel confessed, her voice quiet but filled with a vulnerability that she had never shown before. "To share my life with someone, to let them into this world of responsibility and expectation. I've never allowed anyone close enough to see the weight of it all." Dorian took a step closer to her, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Aracel. I'm not here to fix you or take away your responsibilities. I'm here to stand by your side, to help you carry the weight when it gets too heavy, and to celebrate with you when the victories come. You don't have to be alone in this." Aracel looked at him, the warmth in his eyes reflecting the sincerity in his words. It was like a door inside her was slowly creaking open, and she wasn't sure whether she was ready to step through it or not. But for the first time, she didn't feel the overwhelming pressure of being alone. Dorian wasn't just a diplomat. He had become someone she trusted, someone she wanted to share her life with, someone who saw her, truly saw her, beyond the title of princess. "I want to try," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the night. "I want to see where this can go. With you." Dorian's heart raced, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a real chance at something meaningful. He gently reached out, taking her hand in his, the warmth of their touch grounding them both in that moment. "Then let's take it one step at a time together." And as they stood there, hand in hand, the night felt full of possibility, the future uncertain but full of hope. For the first time, Aracel allowed herself to believe that love and duty could coexist, and that perhaps, with Dorian by her side, she could have both. As the weeks passed, Dorian and Aracel found themselves navigating new territory, together. Their bond had grown from something tentative and fragile to something more solid, more real. The whispers around the palace had only increased, but neither of them cared. They had discovered something worth fighting for, something that went beyond politics and power. Yet, despite their growing closeness, there was still one obstacle neither of them could ignore: the looming threat from within Aracel's court. One evening, as they sat in a secluded garden, their usual haven from the world, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the arrival of Aracel's royal advisor, Valen. Tall, with sharp features and a calculating gaze, Valen had always been loyal to the princess, but his loyalty to her kingdom's traditions ran deeper than his personal feelings for her. Dorian had met Valen only a few times, but each encounter left him with the distinct feeling that the advisor was always watching, always calculating. And now, as he approached them, his expression was serious, even troubled. "Your Highness," Valen said, bowing deeply. His eyes shifted to Dorian, a hint of disapproval in his gaze. "We need to talk." Aracel stood up immediately, sensing the urgency in his tone. "What's wrong, Valen?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and authority. Valen hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his words. "There are growing concerns among the court," he said finally. "There are those who believe that your connection with Dorian is weakening your position. The kingdom expects a queen who is unwavering, who prioritizes the kingdom above all else. They are concerned that your feelings for him are making you distracted, weak." Aracel's heart sank as she listened, but she refused to let her unease show. She had known this moment was coming, though she had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. The court was filled with political games, and many saw Dorian's presence as a threat to their control over her. She had already rejected countless suitors in the past, each one more eager than the last to use her for their own gain. But with Dorian, it was different. He wasn't interested in her power. He cared for her, the person, and that made her feel more alive than she ever had before. "I have made my decision, Valen," Aracel said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Dorian has become an important part of my life, and I won't let anyone dictate who I can trust or care for." Valen's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. He knew that Aracel was not easily swayed, and he understood the weight of her words. But still, he pressed on, trying to maintain his composure. "You may have made your decision, Your Highness, but the court has not. The pressure is mounting. There are those who will stop at nothing to ensure that you are not distracted from your duties. And if you continue down this path—" Aracel's gaze never wavered, her resolve firm. "I understand the risks, Valen, but I will not choose between duty and the person I have become with Dorian's support. I will face this challenge head-on. I will not be controlled by fear." Dorian stood beside her, his heart swelling with admiration for her strength. "We'll face it together," he said quietly, but with firm conviction. For a moment, there was a silence between them. Valen studied them both, and though his face remained neutral, he could see the undeniable bond between the two. It was clear that Aracel was no longer the same person she had been before Dorian had come into her life, and while he respected her decision, he knew the road ahead would be difficult. Valen nodded, his voice softening. "Very well, Your Highness, but know that the court will not back down easily. Be prepared for the challenges ahead." Aracel turned to Dorian, a sense of determination settling in her heart. "I've made my choice, Dorian, and I'm ready to face whatever comes next." Dorian smiled at her, his grip on her hand tightening. "Then we'll face it together, always." And in that moment, as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, they knew that the challenges ahead would not be easy, but with each other, they could overcome anything. The pressure Aracel had been dreading finally came to a head. The whispers in the court grew louder, and with each passing day, it became clear that there were those who would stop at nothing to drive a wedge between her and Dorian. Despite her earlier resolve, the strain was beginning to show. The constant demands from her people, the political pressure, and the subtle manipulations from those within her court who disapproved of her relationship with Dorian were becoming overwhelming. She had made her decision to stand by him, but now, the reality of what that decision meant was hitting harder than ever. One afternoon, after yet another tense council meeting where Dorian had once again defended their bond, Aracel found herself alone in the palace's quiet garden, the place where she had first allowed herself to believe in the possibility of love. The sounds of the kingdom seemed distant, as if the world outside the walls had faded away. Aracel leaned against one of the ancient trees, her thoughts swirling. She had always been so certain of her path, so focused on her duty, but now everything felt more complicated. Could she really have both? Could she truly balance the weight of the crown with the pull of her heart? Just as she began to doubt, Dorian appeared, his presence like a steady anchor in the storm. He approached her quietly, knowing that she needed space, but also knowing that she wouldn't turn away from him. Without a word, he reached out and gently took her hand, a silent offering of support. Aricel's gaze met his, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, the connection they shared more powerful than the rest of the world combined. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Aricel confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The weight of it all is so much. The court, the kingdom, everyone looking to me for answers. It feels like I'm being pulled in 1,000 directions. I don't want to lose myself in all of this, Dorian." Dorian squeezed her hand gently, his voice filled with warmth and understanding. "You don't have to do this alone, Aricel. I'm here. And you don't need to be perfect for me or for anyone else. You're already more than enough." The sincerity in his words broke through the walls she had so carefully built. Aricel closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his support wash over her. She had spent so much of her life being strong for others, afraid to let anyone in. But with Dorian, she didn't have to be afraid anymore. He didn't expect her to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. He was offering to stand by her, to help her share the burden. And for the first time, Aricel truly believed that she didn't have to choose between love and duty. When she opened her eyes, she found Dorian watching her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice more confident this time, "but I want to face it with you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Dorian's smile was soft, but his eyes were filled with hope. "Together," he echoed. And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what challenges the future brought, they would meet them side by side, their hearts aligned in a way that nothing could tear apart. The road ahead would be difficult, but Aricel had finally found the one person who could make her believe that love and duty could exist in harmony. And with Dorian by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, as Aricel and Dorian faced both external and internal challenges. The royal court had begun to stir, and though some remained silent in the face of Aricel's growing closeness with Dorian, others spoke out more openly. There were whispers in every corner, some questioning her ability to lead with a human by her side, while others argued that her decisions were being clouded by emotions rather than the cold, calculated logic that had once made her such a formidable ruler. But through it all, Aricel remained resolute. She had made her choice, and despite the pressure mounting around her, she wasn't going to back down. Dorian, too, found himself caught in the crossfire of political maneuvering. As an outsider, he was viewed with suspicion, especially by the more conservative factions of the court. But he had stood by Aricel through every challenge, offering his counsel and support when she needed it most. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he had never been one to shy away from a fight. More than anything, he wanted to prove to both Aricel and her people that their bond was not a weakness, but a strength. Together, they could accomplish what neither of them could do alone. One evening, after yet another council meeting filled with debate and tension, Aricel invited Dorian to join her on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The air was cool, and the stars above seemed to shimmer like diamonds against the velvet sky. It was a rare moment of quiet, a moment when they could simply be with each other without the weight of the kingdom on their shoulders. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Aricel asked softly, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. She had been carrying the burden of leadership for so long that it was hard to remember what it felt like to let go, to trust someone else with her heart. "I know we both want the same thing, but sometimes I wonder if I'm asking too much of you, or of myself." Dorian stepped closer, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "I don't think we're asking too much, Aricel. I think we're asking for what we deserve. You deserve someone who sees you for who you truly are, not just the princess you're expected to be. And I want to be that person for you, no matter what challenges we face." Aracel turned to face him, her eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want from me, Dorian? You've given so much, and I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Dorian smiled, the kind of smile that was both gentle and full of quiet confidence. "I want to be by your side, Aracel, not for any political gain, not for any power, but because I believe in you. I believe in us, and I believe that together we can make this work. We can face whatever comes, and we'll do it together." For a long moment, Aracel said nothing, her mind racing with everything she had been taught, everything she had been expected to be. But as she looked at Dorian, standing there before her, so sure of his feelings, so steady, she knew in her heart that he was right. This wasn't just about duty. It was about something deeper. It was about love, trust, and a future that was theirs to shape. "I'm ready," Aracel whispered, her voice steady, her heart open. "Let's do this. Together." And with those words, a new chapter began for both of them. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were no longer walking it alone. Together, they would face the future, no matter what it held.